Alright, let's do lab number 10 now. This is question number 1. The first thing is pretty straightforward. It's just finding the equilibrium. Make them equal to each other. 750 minus 10Q equals 250 plus 10Q. Q in this case equals 0.25, and P is now equal to 5. Alright? Second part of the question, you have a tax. Now this tax is going to be assessed on buyers of the good. So now what happens is that buyers will have to pay the price they were paying before, or whatever. No, the price of the that the sellers charge them plus a tax. Okay, and that's going to be equal to the 750 minus 10Q. When we move the tax to the other side, we end up with 750 minus the tax minus 10Q is the new demand. The tax is equal to 1, so the new demand is going to be equal to 650 minus 10Q. And now we make that equal to the original supply curve, equal to 250 plus 10Q. And what we have here is that Q is going to be reduced to 0.20, and that the price is going to be reduced to 450. Now notice that buyers will actually pay 450 to the sellers and $1 to the government. So effectively, the cost of the cigarettes to the buyers is actually 550 now, which is 50 cents more than before. The sellers, on the other hand, are 50 cents worse off too, because they were getting $55 before, and now they're only getting 450. All right. Now to see the welfare effect, we need to do a little diagram here. That's a consumer and producer surplus. This is Q, this is P. The original demand curve is 750, and then the supply curve, which is 250 here. And the original equilibrium, when there's no tax, this was equal to 25, and the price was equal to $5. Then there's a tax that reduces the equilibrium to 450. But then buyers have to pay $1 tax on top of that, so they're really paying $5.50. And the quantity with the tax is 20, and that will be the quantity regardless of who pays the tax to the government, sellers or buyers. Now let's call this area A, B, C, and let's call this area E, F. Let's go F. Well, let's see if we can get rid of that. E and F. Alright, so now let's see what the changes in surplus is. So let's do no tax, tax, and then the change. Alright, so let's do consumer surplus first. When there's no tax, the price is 5, so consumer surplus is the area between 5 and the demand curve, so it's A plus B plus C. When there's a tax, the price is 5.5, effectively to buyers. They pay 450 to the sellers and $1 to the government, so the cost is 550. And the area between that and the demand curve is just A. So the change, well, they lost B plus C. Now for producer surplus, well, before the price is $5, the producer surplus is the area between the price and the supply, so it's going to be D plus E plus F. For consumers, I mean, with the tax, the price that producers get goes down to 450. The area between 450 and the supply curve is now F, so they lose areas D plus E. And clearly, the market is worse than before. Now notice that B plus D, this area right here, is actually government revenue. All right, so tax revenue is equal to B plus D, and which is actually the tax, $1 times how many units are sold with the tax, which is 0.2. So really, if we assume that the government uses that money wisely, then the overall loss as a result of the tax is really area C plus E, and we call that a deadweight loss. Right, so that's the welfare effect of the tax. Now, this part of the analysis is so you realize that that the more elastic the market becomes, the less burden of a tax you have. Notice from before that the consumers were paying 50 cents out of the $1 tax, so they're paying 50% of the tax because the price the consumers pay for the cigarettes, the cost of the cigarettes changed 50 cents for them. It was before $5 and now end up being $5.50 with the tax. For sellers, you end up having the same burden of a tax. It was before they were getting $5 from the buyers, and now the sellers with the tax end up getting $4.50, so they're also 50 cents worse. So the sellers, so the share of the burden before the tax, so before tax, the burden for buyers was, well, the 50 cents, with the tax. So this is the burden with the tax before this change, right? So before new supply. Before new supply, this is in part A. The burden for buyers, well, it's 50 cents out of a $1 tax, so it basically is 50%. Buyers are feeling 50% of the tax. Now the burden for sellers is also 50% because they are 50 cents worse off, and the tax is $1. So they're also 50% worse off. So they're both sharing the same burden of the tax. And this question basically asks you, if you solve the numbers, what you're going to find out is that the change in price for the buyers is going to be more than the change in price for the sellers. So basically, with new supply curve, burden on sellers will be lower, and burden on the same token, burden on buyers will be higher. So the tax burden share that the sellers have will be less, and the reason is because of this here. Now, the more elastic the market, the less burden, tax burden. And that's because that market can adapt to the tax and pass that tax to the other side. Okay? Just remember that example that we did with a girlfriend and boyfriend. But to calculate the tax burden, simply divide the change in the price that the side of the market pays over the tax, and that gives you the percentage change, the actual burden of the tax. This question compares two policies, the policy of a quota versus a tax. Let's do the tax first. So with the tax, first find the equilibrium. So we have 50 minus P equals P. So P is going to be equal to 25, and Q is going to be equal to 25. Now we're going to put that in the supply or demand. Let's put it in the demand. The result for in terms of welfare is going to be the same. So now it's going to be 46 minus P equals P. So Q so P is going to be equal to 23, and Q is also going to be equal to 23. Now notice that the buyers are not going to pay $23. That's what they paid. That's what the buyers are going to pay the sellers, but they have to pay $4 to the government. So the cost of the cigarettes is really going to be $27 for the buyers with the tax. Now with the quota, what we have is, well, it's easier because the quantity is 23, so you have to adjust. The demand will have to adjust to that. So what we have is that the price can be solved by making the supply, which is 23, equal to the demand, which is 50 minus P. So you're going to end up with a price of $27, and when you put that in the quantity again ends up being 23. So what you actually have here is that in the case of the quota and the tax, the situation is the same, but buyers are worse off by $4. I'm sorry, by $2. They were paying 25 before, and with the tax, the cost is going to be 27, $23 they pay to the sellers, and then 4 to the government. And then with the quota, the price is going to be 27. So the buyers are worse off by $2 regardless. Now the sellers is a different story. The sellers are worse off by $2 now, because it's $23 versus 25 with the tax. But when there's no tax, they actually get $27. With the quota, they get $27. So they're suffer, but because there's less sellers in the market, some sellers exit the market, but they're getting a higher price with the quota. So the quota is a lot better for sellers than the tax. Now we can see that a little better in a diagram. So let's see that here. Q and P. And this is 50. And this is a supply. Originally, this was 25. And no policy, and this is 25. Now we have a tax. This goes down to 23. This goes down to 23 too, but the buyers are going to pay 23 plus a $4 tax, so they're really going to pay 27. So let's call this A, B, C, D, E, and F. So how is the tax affecting the surplus of the consumers? Well, the consumers had A, B, and C before, and now they only have A, so they're worse off by B and they lost B and C with the tax. And how are producers affected by the tax? Well, they had D, E, and F before, and now with the tax, they only get $23, so they only get F as surplus. Now the quota, again, what it does is to put a barrier up to here, so there can be no production beyond that point. So now the consumers are worse off by, well, they're also again worse off by losing B and C and only getting a surplus of A. So the quota and the tax are the same. They're hurting consumers equally. But the sellers are getting $27, so they're getting a surplus of B, D, and F only up to that point, because there's no production beyond 23, but they're clearly getting a surplus that is higher than the surplus that we're getting with the tax. So the quota actually is much better to the sellers than it is to the buyers. So the difference is that this area here, which is the tax revenue that the government collects with the tax, basically goes to the sellers when there's a quota. All right, so that's the change in welfare. Different change in welfare to the two policies.